I'm super excited. I want to introduce my friends here, Mr. Bob Milner and General Hummer. I'll start with retired General Hummer, Stephen Hummer. He was born to a World War II veteran in Pennsylvania. He enlisted as a sergeant. I won't include that year, however, I do know it, so I'll hold that in my breast pocket just in case. He got a bachelor's of psychobiology. After getting that bachelor's degree, he went back in as an officer, and he spent 41 years total in the United States Marine Corps. Now, for military guys, usually you think of a military career as 20 years. He doubled that. That's pretty outstanding. He was a leader in multiple commands, commanding general of the Marine Corps, Base Hawaii, chief of staff for the U.S. Special Operations Command, commanding general for AFRICOM. He's a senior fellow at the National Defense University. He has a master's in international security. He volunteers with multiple veteran service organizations. And currently, he's studying to be a chaplain. Awesome work, sir. Mr. Bob Milner, my friend. For me, I know Bob as a community leader most. He grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. He spent 7 years in the Air Force. He got a degree in economics and then went on to get his MBA. He started out in the oil industry, but also car dealerships, and he worked his way up to managing partner, co-founder, and now he owns multiple car dealerships. He's a serial entrepreneur in multiple spaces. He's a professor at Sam Houston State University. He's a hometown hero here in the Woodlands. He was just elected as the Woodlands Township Director, position 7. He started an animal rescue. It's called Heart down in Houston, and right now they have 57 pets available if you're looking to adopt a pet. Just side info for you. And the list for these guys go on, and I could spend the whole time talking about how incredible they are, but I just want to add one note to the end of their bios. They're both servants, number 1, and when all is said and done, more will be said than done for most people, but not these guys. They're doers. So thank you guys for being here with me. I'm humbled to be here with you. I'm going to start you guys off with a question. I'm going to hand one to General Hummer first. There's a scripture, 1 Peter 4:10, it talks about believers' gifts. And I want to read that. It says, each one has received a special gift. Employ that to serve others as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. Based on your leadership experience and military experience, can you break that down and just share a little bit about that scripture for us?
Test. Yeah, thanks, Charis. Thanks for everybody coming out today too. This is a great conference. So, I don't think there's a whole lot different with the gifts that God has given us, whether you use them in the civilian community or you use them in the military community. But God has given us gifts. How many people in here are kind of questioning what their gifts are? Okay? So yeah, there are those. And the other ones then, people who didn't raise your hand, you're solid, you know what God's gifts are for you, your talents, your abilities. If you're not, I recommend one way is just try out some of them, right? If you think you're not a speaker, try speaking, right? If you think you're not a giver, try giving. If you think you're not a helper, try helping. And, it's kind of like try that shoe on and see if it fits, and there's probably a good chance that you're going to find your God-given gift pretty darn quick. Because everyone has gifts and everyone has talents, because it says so in the Bible. So I wrote some down. So whether speaking, serving, helping, ministering, evangelizing, singing, painting, doctoring, right? Whatever you do, your job How did you get to your job? Your job is a gift from God, right? And I've been studying a little bit, doing some word studies on good works. All right, do you know what your good works are? Well, your good works, right, were from Christ that God determined, right, for you to do, right? Created in Christ Jesus for good works. God prepared beforehand so that we could walk in them. So, whatever you're doing, your good works have been planned beforehand by God. So, whatever they are, whatever your talents, whatever your abilities are, right, God wants you to do those. Now, it applies to the military too. And if every day, and every job, everything you do, I think there was a story about some friar in a convent. I guess, I don't know if friars are in convents or not, but, and he washed dishes, right? But his dishwashing was to the glory of God. So no matter what you do, no matter what your talents are, no matter what your abilities are, one, you have some. Two, God wants you to use them, and everything's to His glory.
Amen. So you can do anything, and if you add to the glory of God, that changes everything.
It does. It absolutely does.
Next question I want to send to Bob Milner. You do a lot in the community. I didn't mention that you serve on a dozen boards or something like that. And there's a lot of people that search for their why, and it's important to find your why very early or as early as possible. So talk about your why for serving.
I think I'm still defining my why, but I've become more clear over the later stages in my current life of what my why is. I think is a common theme here today when you think about the previous two panels and what General Hummer just said about your gifts. And I go back to, I believe what was Mark spoke about, Matthew 5:16, let your light shine so that others may see your good and glorify your Father. I think that's the way, part of it is I was raised. I tell people I have a lot in common with Joseph. He was born to a really big family, had a great robe, and everybody loved him. And I was born poor in Memphis, Tennessee, to a guy who really, I guess, got us as kids to understand that your why, your mission in life is to serve. So my father, from a very young age, got us to understand that everybody in life can help someone. It doesn't matter what your role, what your status is, right? So I think my gift from God has always really been to serve others. From a very young age, I was always helping take care of my sister and my brothers and my mother. I was the kid in school that, wanted to help the teachers, wanted to help other kids. I was a very talented athlete. I spent a lot of time helping other athletes improve their skills. But it's funny, if you think about really making yourself vulnerable, which they talked about in the previous session, if you really were willing to let yourself be vulnerable to what God's plan is for you and the path that He can create, the broadness of the impact that you can make is just, you can't control it, right? And so I think, I reached a point in my life where I realized that God's plan for me was impact, and that impact came from service. And I think that's really kind of how I've focused my life, my career, my relationship with my family, and people like you in the community.
Thank you for sharing that. General Hummer, we had a conversation probably 2 years ago now, and I asked about some leadership qualities. One of them that you mentioned was a leader works harder for their people, then their people work for them. So I'm wondering how you kind of break that down for us, and what kind of biblical model can we apply and use to fuel that in ourselves as leaders?
Okay. Nobody believes that, do they? That your bosses work harder for you than you do for them? That's just a myth. Nobody believes that. When you're in a leadership position, there's a lot of things going on. For most of your people, they may have specific hours that they're working. They're not working 24/7. Whereas the chance of the leader getting that call in the middle of the night, especially in the military, that's very high. I mean, we talk about all of us being on 24/7 in the military, but that's not totally true. However, the leadership is. And then when you look at all the things that are encompassed in a lot of leadership jobs, they're responsible and they have to be multitaskers, and just have to keep up with a lot of things while taking care of their people. And then one of the things I think Mark said this morning in the opening was that everybody has something going on in their life that's probably not as good as they'd like. They may have aging parents that they're working with. Their children may have some challenges. They may have challenges at work, but they're not wearing that on their sleeve, right? There's no banner that they're walking around saying, "I have cancer." But as to know your people, you find that out. And that's a big part of a leadership job. And leadership takes time. If you're going to have that individual interface with people, that takes time. If you're going to get to know people, that takes time. And it takes developing a relationship and developing leadership. One of the challenges is kind of funny. So when military folks get out of the military and they transition and they go to write a resume, they'll write, "I was a company commander in charge of 180 Marines, and we did this, and we did that, and we did this. I was a regimental commander. I was in charge of 7,000 Marines and whatever. So what in the civilian community do they think when they read that? Well, they read that this guy was a boss, and he was given a lot of orders, right? So the individual looking at that resume is going, I don't want this guy to work for me. He's going to try and take over my job. But when you look at leadership, and there's just so many examples of leadership out there. There's two, just real quick. One was Moses. He certainly had his wilderness period, right? And then has his burning bush moment, and God tells him what to do, and what's he say? I'm not good at that. I'm not a good speaker. I don't think it should be me. Can you pick somebody else? Right? But then he goes, he's talking straight to Pharaoh for his people, and talk about working 24/7, right? He was busy, and multitask, right? And then, right, comes out of Egypt with, what, 3.5 million Jews, right? Crosses the Red Sea in another 40 years in the wilderness. This poor guy. And, his people thought he was incompetent, right? He couldn't get them water, couldn't get them food, right? But in fact, he depended on God. And we know that story, how eventually, one of the generations got to the promised land. But if you look at his, he wasn't very skilled, certainly was not necessarily a great speaker, self-admittedly, but he led those people. But it was through God. God, through him, led those people. And then has already been mentioned. You know, the greatest leader is Jesus Christ. And leaders sacrifice. They sacrifice their time. They sacrifice their energy. In some cases, they sacrifice their money. And of course, our Lord Jesus Christ sacrificed everything for mankind. And then humility, I think, in a leader is very, very important. And of course, we see that in Moses, and we see that in Jesus also. So those are two examples that I would give as far as sacrifice. But you'll hear in a lot of organizations servant leadership, and I think that is important. If you put your people before your own desires, your own aspirations, your people and what you do will take care of you with regard to your own aspirations. And you know, God will work that for your good, the good of your people, and the good of your organization.
Very good. Bob, that's a good segue to Bob's question. I want to ask, Bob, what are a couple leadership characteristics that you try to exhibit on a daily basis that you feel deeply enough about to act on them?
That's a great question. It's a great follow-up question to what he just said. I think the first thing is I had to reach a point in my life where I understood I had to lead me first. If I couldn't responsibly lead me, it became very difficult for me to be a responsible leader of others. And it was when I really realized at a point in my life that I was incapable of leading me without Christ, without prayer, without God, then I was also incapable of leading others. And as I began to depend on the path that God gave me in leading myself, I became a more effective leader of people. And, you know, there's way more to it. I'm a student of EQ. I read a lot. I go to a lot of conferences. I'm a student of self-development, have been my entire life. But I think that's the first piece, is I really had to become foundational at leading myself, and that required me to become vulnerable and trust that God's path would be there, that God would lead me where He needed me to be, when He needed me to be there. So I think that's the first thing. I think the other thing that came from becoming a servant to God in my leadership development, and General Hummer just spoke about it, is I think all good leaders focus on someone else, others, and not themselves. And I think if we focus on others, ourselves will take care of themselves. And I kind of look at this in my business. I started really focusing on the culture in my businesses about 15 years ago, where I would sit down with every employee on my team, and we would come up with life goals and professional goals. And I felt like my responsibility as their leader, as a servant to them, was to not only help them focus on goals that were going to help our business, but help them focus on goals that were going to help them in life. And when I became really successful at leading them to focus on their life development and their life pursuit of goals, I honestly never had to worry about my professional goals. Our team took us where we needed our business to go, where God wanted it to be at that time, where I mapped it out to be in my great master plan. It was the team that ended up carrying the company, the team, me, the rest of my leadership team. And I think those are the two real principles. Is I think as leaders, people look to us. We need to be transparent. We need to be a leader 24/7, like General Hummer talked about. You know, I'm a leader when I'm at the theater with my wife watching a movie in the community, because people see me and they see how I act in that theater when I'm with my wife. I'm a leader if I'm at Whataburger eating lunch with someone, right? And I think we as leaders need to understand that our leadership footprint is everywhere, right? And you need to think about every footprint you make in life leaves the footprint behind you. And what is that footprint going to look like to the person that is standing behind you or following behind you or following your path? And I think that's what I really try to focus on, is I want that footprint always to represent something that is positive, that is focused on others and not me, but most importantly is focused on what God's plan is for that path of impact.
Awesome. I want to divert here a little bit, and both of you guys, I've known you for a couple years, and it's neat to watch leaders like these two gentlemen, and I learn a lot from them just by watching them. That's the difference between excellent leaders and people who just talk. I think leaders do. They hold back on saying a lot, and I just get to watch you guys and learn from you. Recently, I sat down with General Hummer, and we talked for about an hour, and at the very end of our conversation, we went out, and he reached into his pocket and pulled out a little tiny cross, and he said, "I want you to have this. It's just a gift from me. It's a little cross carved out of olive wood, and it came from Jerusalem, Bethlehem. And about a year prior to that, he gave me a coin, and this gentleman has one of the crosses too. He gave me a coin after we talked for about an hour. And Bob Milner, a couple years ago, one of the first times we met, I said, "Hey, Bob, give me some book recommendations." And he said, "Okay, let me think about that." And he showed up to lunch, and he brought a paper sack full of 5 books, and he said, "Here, read these." And the reason I say that is because leaders give of themselves. They give of their money, their time. They give good gifts, and that leaves an impression on people. So General Hummer, can you talk about the importance of just giving and sacrificing? Most of us, or I shouldn't say most of us, I think, well, when I have a little bit more, I can give a little bit more.
So I wonder if Bob's got his coin. Terry's got his coin.
I came equipped.
My cross is on the desk at Sam Houston State.
Well, first off, wow, that's a lot to say. First off, our existence here is not about ourselves. It's not about us. It's all about God. Now that's hard, right? Because the devil wants us to think about it that it's about us. And there's so much out there in the world that wants us to think it's about us, right? I mean, talk about pride of life. All the commercials that you see, it's all about us. It's all about us looking really good, feeling really good, having our hair done really good. We are 5% of the world's population, but well over 50% of the world's prosperity. Yet we have more people on antidepressants. We have high suicide rates, the opioid crisis and drugs. You know all about that. Alcohol. Over all the prosperity that we have, why can't we be happy? And we're not. Of course, then go back, I mean, the Israelites weren't happy in the wilderness either, even though they had everything they needed to eat. They've done studies, and they've taken folks that were on antidepressants, and they've put them in situations where they could serve others, volunteer type stuff, and helping other people, whatever it was. High rates of people come off antidepressants when they're serving others, right? Because when people are focused on themselves, their status, how they look, what they have, all of that, they run themselves into the ground, right? And that's what the devil wants. He wants us to be distracted. He wants us to be distracted by the catalogs that you get in your mailbox. You look at them and you go, geez, I never even knew this existed, but I got to have it, right? So it just keeps our mind. It keeps us busy. TV, right? Anything to keep us from meditating, praying, and spending time in God's wonderful Word. So again, it's not about us, and it is about giving back to the talents and abilities that you have. That's why we're here. We're here to do God's divine plan and to do his good works wherever we see those opportunities. And, you know, just as I've said, the statistics show that helps people when they understand that as they serve others. And that's why we're here. It's not about us. We're here to serve others, and we look for opportunities through God to do that.
Very good. You have anything to add to that, Bob?
Know that I could add anything to it, honestly.
Let me ask you a question about fear, because fear gets all of us. There's a couple. You guys are both courageous people, and you don't carry a sword around and a big shield and bang it together and charge at giants, but you act. You do things for others and you serve others. There's a couple quotes that I have memorized that I go back to often. One of them's from Henry David Thoreau. He said that most people live lives of quiet desperation. I agree with that. I think people live lives of quiet desperation. And there's another one by Anise Nin. She says life expands and contracts in proportion to our courage. So my question for you, Bob, is how do we get over the fear and move into leadership and be more courageous?
Wow. It's a great question, because as I listened to the previous panel, I thought about all the times in my life where fear paralyzed me from being able to do something like that. And most friends who know me would look at me when I use the word fear in context with me, would question that, because I was a daredevil. I would jump off of the cliff. I've done one of those crazy things. I've walked out of the back of an airplane at 23,000 feet. Not everybody wants to do that. But I think, overcoming fear is the biggest challenge to the impact of who you can become. I think it's the biggest challenge of who God can really turn you into and what he can use you for. If you were to look at my Briggs-Myers, I am the most introverted profile that there is in the world. Significantly, statistically, it's the rarest introverted profile of anybody in the world. 20 years ago, I would not have shown up today to sit on a stage, all right? But God took me in a place when he began to get me to understand that you're not doing this for you, like what General Hummer talked about. You're doing this for me. And don't be afraid when you do things for me. Don't be afraid to step out of your comfort zone when it's for me, because I'm the greatest overcomer in the history of the world. Amen. Right? And it kind of became a constant conversation with God early in my professional career, my military career, and that, okay, God, I'm afraid of this. If this is where you want me to be, you're going to have to take my hand sometimes, and sometimes you're going to have to put your boot in my back and push me. And he did. So I think, it's easy to let fear overcome you. I think about, I think one of the big lessons to me is the prodigal son, right? He leaves, he goes away, he wastes everything, throws his life away. It would have been easy to be afraid to go back home and instead just become a slave to society and his fear. And he didn't, and look at what God did with helping him overcome that fear of going home, right? And, you think of so many people that are afraid of their path in life, their place in life. You look across history and you think, what if Benjamin Franklin would have been afraid to try the 10,000th time with a fiber to create the light bulb after he had failed 9,999 times? So you could think back through history and you can see that fear changes outcome. And without God, that outcome can be devastating. But if we trust God with our fears, that outcome is going to be glorious, and it always will be. So I think that's the biggest thing I would say about fear.
Awesome. Great response. Thank you. I don't want to be selfish. I want to open up for 2 questions. I'm going to get us back on track because I did some time in the Navy and I like to be on time. So a couple quick questions. These guys are some of the most humble leaders that I know. So just hit them with a question. If you need the mic, I'll run it to you. Joe's got something. Oh, who's got a question? Yeah.
So I recently went to a training with Brene Brown, Dare to Lead leadership certification. And one of the things that she said that stuck out to me is she's never met a truly transformational leader that is not using either a therapist or a coach in their life. So that brings me to the issue that you brought up, Bob, about leading yourself first, but then also leading others. And of course, at times in your life, there can be an imbalance with that. So what are some tools and tricks to stay in balance so that you don't go too far into leading yourself and you're not able to lead others?
So that's an easy question for me to answer. I have a great coach who is a very strong Christian who manages to keep me inside the rails of the bowling alley that kids use so they don't get gutter balls. It's not uncommon for him and I to have a conversation during the week and him remind me that, okay, that's you. Forget about you. I don't care about you. I want to know what it is God is saying to you. And he's able to bring me back into that balance of that. I will say that it's those times when I am too much me that I make my biggest mistakes, or I rush into something in a way that had I been less me and more about someone else or more about, my conversation with God, I might have made a different decision, or that decision might have looked differently had I taken time to make it maybe better. And then I have a great wife who's good at keeping me in balance. Terry knows my wife. Carla knows my wife. Kim knows my wife. She's very grounded, and she helps me stay grounded. She is my partner in life. She's my best friend. She's my prayer partner. And I think, between my coach and my wife and me having a constant conversation with God, those are kind of the 3 things in that sense of self-development versus the focus on others.
Awesome. Behind every great man, there's an even greater woman. So if you want to be a great man, one more question before we leave. Okay.
All right, so I've never done the Meyer-Briggs, but I've done the DISC, and I'm a very high D and nothing else. So I like to get stuff done. It's hard for me to sit there and have small talk, but I have a team of, 2 of them are women that love to share their lives and talk. So what I struggle with is I got to build those connections. I got to be a good leader, but I really have to force myself to listen and not get upset. Like, we got things to do. Let's cut this short, and I'm not building those connections. So what are some tangible things that either of you have done to help build that within yourself? I also like emotional intelligence, and that's something that I struggle with. So, building that empathy, building that time to connect and not get frustrated and upset, because I need those connections, but I also need to get stuff done. So there's a balance there, right?
This is great. So you've apparently never read Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, right? And I told Terry this morning, he asked me a question. I told him, get that book. Who's read that? Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. It's a great book. It's a lot of generalities. It's a humorous book, but very, am I right? Very, very true, okay? And just specifically on what you're talking about. Well, women, they share. They like to share verbally. They're verbal. right? So when they have a crisis, you know, at the end of the day, whatever, the guy comes home from Mars, and she wants to tell him about her day. Well, what's the guy want to do? Huh? Well, that's true. He wants to solve problems, so he's going to tell her how to solve problems, and that's not what she wants. She just wants to share, right? Or the man he's been busy all day, he's been talking all day, he's been doing all this stuff. He just wants to have some time to himself, right? But so you can see the conflict right away. Anyhow, men are for Mars, women are for Venus. The book has been around a while, but actually it's timeless. But you got to read that, and it'll help you out a lot in kind of understanding people and understanding the conflicts that people can get into, just because they don't understand the other people.
Great. Go, Bob, you have anything?
I would just say that about 5 or 6 years ago, I had the great blessing to go through the Thayer Leadership Development Institute at West Point, and one of the first things they did is give us the disc, and I've taken the disc probably 20 times in my life. And I took the disc, and I got a call like 2 days later from someone that was with Anderson Consulting, says, "Hey, I'm calling because I wanted to talk to you about your disc profile." I said, "Oh, is there something wrong with it?" "Well, we'd really like to give it to you again." I said, "Well, why?" Because, I mean, it's not like you can cheat on the disc, right? And they said, "Well, you know, you scored a 98D, and that's kind of high. But when we talk to people who know you, they're like, no, that can't be right. You must have got the test confused because he doesn't act like a 98D. So you talked about how do you overcome things like that. I think it takes work, because I can tell you 20 years ago, I acted like a 98D. And I alienated people that I worked with and things like that because I acted like a 98D. I began to learn how to manage that part of my dominant personality, to want to be in control, to want to be in charge, to want to control everything in my life. And I think, you know, that came about through better development in my relationship with Christ. But I think it also came about, I journal a lot. And when I have those tendencies, rather than act on them, I write about them. And so I use those to go back and read. Sometimes when I'm thinking certain D traits, I can go back, and I learned this from Bill Gates. I color code all of my writings based on either emotions or activity. And so if I want to go to look for something that has to do with emotional characteristics, it's a certain color in my journals, and I go back and read those things, and it helps me bring some thought balance back to, oh yeah, I remember when I acted like a D that day, and this is what has happened, and I don't want that to happen again, right? So I think that's really kind of the two things for me, I would say.
Awesome. I want to thank you guys for spending some time with us today. Would you join me in a round of applause for these guys?
It's not about us. It's not about us.